I got home from a 4-day work conference and my $90K SUV was gone. My sister smiled and said, "Family decided. Mom needs it more than you." My father didn't say a word. I stayed calm. 6 hours later, they watched the tow truck loaded up in front of the whole neighborhood because the SUV was actually... The 9-page lease agreement had been sitting in the glove box of that Tahoe since the day Halverson Transport handed me the keys. Page 1, Section 1. This vehicle is the property of Halverson Transport, LLC. Unauthorized transfer of possession constitutes theft of company property under Iowa Code 714.1. My sister did not read the glove box. My brother-in-law, who sold cars for 11 years and told my sister the lessee name was what mattered, read the glove box and stopped at the wrong page. My mother, who told me the family had a conversation about my vehicle while I was at a 4-day conference in Minneapolis, did not know the glove box existed. 6 hours after I got home and found my driveway empty. A tow truck from C&R Recovery turned onto Birchwood Lane while 12 of my sister's neighbors were still outside after school pickup. The driver did not argue with anyone. He read page 1 of the glove box agreement, clipped his chain to the frame, and did his job. I am Mabel Corey. I am 34 years old. I am the Fleet Operations Manager for Halverson Transport in Cedar Falls, Iowa, which means I have known since my first day of work exactly what happens when company property leaves company custody without a signed authorization form. My sister did not have a signed authorization form. She had a spare key she had made from my keychain at a family dinner in June, which I did not know about until the GPS logs told me. But I am getting ahead of myself. Welcome back to Calm Life Stories. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and hit subscribe, because a story that ends with a tow truck on a residential street in August needs witnesses, and I want you to be one of them. Let me take you back, not to the conference, not to the empty driveway, to the summer I was 17 years old and saved 8 months of babysitting money for a second-hand bike that my mother gave to my sister because Ashton asked for it and I had not said anything. I did not say anything because I had been taught that saying anything was a form of selfishness. In the Corey house, need was something you performed loudly enough to be noticed. I had not learned to perform yet. Ashton had been performing since she was 4. My father, Norm, is a retired electrician from Millbrook, Iowa. He loves me the way quiet men love the daughters they have failed, carefully, from a distance, with small gestures that cost nothing and change nothing. My mother, Rhonda, worked as a school secretary for 22 years. She retired in 2019. She has a crocheted dish towel that my grandmother Opal made for her as a wedding gift in 1985, cream cotton with a blue border, and she keeps it draped over her left shoulder in the kitchen the way other women keep their phones, always within reach, something to do with her hands when the conversation turns difficult. Ashton is 3 years older than me. She married Dex Parnell in 2014. Dex sold cars at a Chevy dealership in Waterloo for 11 years. He left in 2020. He describes himself now as a consultant. What he consults on is a question nobody in my family has thought to ask. I asked it once. He said, "Real estate, adjacent work." I wrote that phrase down when he said it because I have learned to write down things that do not mean anything specific. I have worked at Halverson Transport for 6 years. I manage a fleet of 23 company vehicles, including trucks, vans, and 3 executive SUVs assigned to senior staff. In 2022, when I was promoted to Fleet Operations Manager, I was assigned Lot 14, a 2022 Chevrolet Tahoe, Company Blue, valued at $74,000. The vehicle is registered to Halverson Transport, LLC as primary owner. I am listed as named employee lessee. My name and the company name are both on the registration card. The corporate lease agreement in the glove box is 9 pages long. Page 1, Section 1 states the ownership and the consequence of unauthorized transfer. I have read every page of that agreement. I read everything I sign. That is the dispatch voice habit. You read what you commit to, so you know what you are responsible for. Dex Parnell also read part of the glove box. I know this now because the police report confirmed it. He found the registration card, saw my name listed as lessee, and told my sister that a lessee name on a vehicle registration was effectively ownership. He told her the company would just issue me a new one. He told her it was basically mine to loan. He did not read page 9. Page 9 is the indemnification clause. It specifies that the named lessee is personally liable for any unauthorized third-party access or possession of the vehicle, and that the company retains the right to report such access as theft under Iowa Code 714-1. Page 9 is also where the GPS fleet tracking disclosure is. I know what page 9 says because I wrote it. I helped our HR director draft the lessee agreement update in 2021. I sat in that conference room for 4 hours, making sure the language was tight enough to protect the company. I want you to hold on to that because it is the whole hinge of the story. I left for Minneapolis on a Thursday morning, 4-day logistics conference. I took a rideshare to the airport. I left the Tahoe in my driveway, locked, because I park it at home on conference weeks per Halverson's policy. I texted my mother Thursday afternoon to check in. She said everything was fine. She used the word fine 3 times in 2 sentences, which I noted and filed under things I would ask about when I got home. I landed back in Cedar Falls on Monday at 11:04 a.m. I took a rideshare home. I turned onto my street and my driveway was empty. Not the specific kind of empty where you forget where you parked. The oil stain on the concrete was still dark. The space where the Tahoe had been parked for 6 months had that particular absence that a specific vehicle leaves when it is gone. The dimensions of the space were wrong for there to be nothing in it. My sister was on my porch. She was sitting in the chair I keep by the front door for package deliveries. She had a coffee in one hand. She had the expression she gets when she has already decided how a conversation is going to go and is waiting for you to catch up. She said, "We had a family conversation while you were gone. Mom needs more room in her driveway, and you have a company car, so they will just get you a new one. And we figured the Tahoe fits our family better right now." I want you to sit with those 2 sentences for a moment. We had a family conversation, as if the vehicle had been discussed into a different registration, as if the words company car meant it belonged to whoever needed it most that week. I did not raise my voice. I have the dispatch voice for moments like this. I said, "Where is it?" She said, "Dex drove it to our place. We moved your things to the garage. The car seat fits perfect in the 3rd row." I said, "Ashton, where is the registration card?" She said, "Dex looked at it. Your name is on it. It is fine." I said, "Where is Dad?" She said, "Inside." I went inside. My father was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the look of a man who has been sitting with something for 4 days and has not found a way to set it down. I said, "Dad, did you know?" He said, "I drove her over to get the key." I want you to understand what that sentence means. Not that he allowed it. Not that he stood by. He drove Ashton to my house, to my kitchen, and let her take the spare key from the hook inside my cabinet while I was in Minneapolis, and then he said one word when she drove away in my company vehicle. He said, "Okay." I stood in that kitchen for 4 seconds. My hands were steady. That is the dispatch voice in the body. When the worst information arrives, the trained part of you flattens first so you can give the next instruction. I said, "Okay, Dad." I walked back outside. Ashton was still on my porch. I said, "I have to make a call." I went inside, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and called Halverson HR. If you have ever come home to something missing and been told it was a family decision, comment my name on the registration below and hit subscribe because the next part is the part Dex still has not explained publicly, and I want you here for it. I called Sandra at Halverson HR at 11:38 a.m. Sandra has been in HR at Halverson for 14 years. She answers the phone the way dispatchers answer, on the second ring with her last name. "Ready?" I said. "Sandra, this is Mabel Corey. Lot 14 has been taken from my driveway without authorization. I need to pull the fleet GPS log for the past 60 days. A pause, shorter than you would expect. She said, "Mabel, how long has it been gone?" I said, "I have been at conference since Thursday. I need the full log." She said, "I am pulling it now. Give me 3 minutes." I sat at my desk. Outside my window, I could hear Ashton on the porch, on her phone. She was talking to Dex. I could hear the specific tone of a person narrating a situation to someone who helped create it. Sandra came back on the line at 11:43. She said, "Mabel, the GPS log shows the vehicle left your registered home address 4 times in the past 60 days. Once on Monday this morning. That was the primary take, 6:14 a.m., before you landed. But there are 3 prior events I need you to look at. July 9th, July 23rd, and August 2nd. Each time the vehicle left your home address for 2 to 4 hours and returned. The July 9th trip logged a route to Birchwood Lane in Millbrook and back." I said, "That is my sister's address." She said, "Yes, I thought that might be the case." "Mabel, I have to ask, did you authorize any of those trips?" I said, "No." She said, "Did you know your sister had access to the vehicle?" I said, "I am finding out right now." A longer pause. She said, "I am going to need you to come in this afternoon." HR, the fleet director, and our legal team. This is not just a civil matter, Mabel. 3 unauthorized uses plus this morning constitutes a pattern. I am also going to need to know how she accessed the vehicle for the first 3 trips. I said, "She made a key." Another pause. The kind of pause that means a decision is being made. She said, "When I said, family dinner in June. I do not know the exact date. She must have had it copied from my keychain." Sandra said, "I need that date narrowed down if you can." And Mabel, there is one more thing in the log I have to tell you. The July 23rd trip included a stop at the Iowa Department of Transportation Vehicle Services Office on South 7th, 18 minutes. Do you know why your vehicle would have been at DOT services on July 23rd? I said, "No," Sandra said. "I will call our insurance carrier while you come in. Can you be here by 1?" I said, "Yes." I hung up. I opened my calendar and looked at June. There had been one family dinner in June, the 14th, my parents' anniversary. I had put my keys on the hook by the back door when I arrived. I always put my keys on the hook by the back door. Ashton had offered to help in the kitchen. She had been in and out of the back hallway 3 times. I wrote down June 14 in my notes. Then I looked up what the Iowa DOT Vehicle Services Office processes on weekday appointments in July. One category of transactions stood out: change of primary lessee on a fleet vehicle. You need the registration card and a form signed by the outgoing lessee or the registered owner. I did not have the form. Halverson Transport had not signed anything. I had not signed anything. I called Sandra back. I said, "Sandra, the DOT stop on July 23rd. Can you check whether anyone filed a change of primary driver or lessee form on Lot 14 in the past 60 days? Silence then. I will call DOT right now. I will have the answer when you get here." I got here. I was in Sandra's conference room by 1:07 p.m. with the fleet director, our HR legal advisor, and Sandra's printed GPS report on the table between us. Sandra said, "Mabel, the Iowa DOT confirmed a change of primary driver filing was submitted for Lot 14 on July 23rd. The form lists you as the outgoing lessee with a signature. The incoming lessee is listed as Ashton Corey Parnell. The Halverson Transport authorization line was left blank. The form was submitted by a third party on behalf of the named lessee." She set a copy of the DOT record on the table. The signature on the outgoing lessee line is your name, but our handwriting sample on file for your signature from your employment contract, your lessee agreement, and your expense reports does not match the DOT submission. I have already sent both samples to our insurance carrier. They have flagged this as a fraudulent insurance filing under Iowa Code 507E. I looked at the signature on the DOT form. It was close. It was someone who had practiced my signature using the lessee agreement they had read in the glove box. It was close enough to pass a DOT clerk at the window, but not close enough to pass an HR professional who had been signing my expense approvals for 6 years. I said, "Who submitted it?" Sandra said, "The submitting party listed on the form is Dex Parnell. I want you to hold on to that because it is not the end of what Dex Parnell submitted in July. It is only the beginning of what Iowa Code 507E covers and what a prior license suspension in 2019 means when a state investigator starts pulling a pattern. But first, I want to tell you about the tow truck. I called CNR Recovery at 11:51 a.m. before I drove to Halverson. I did not call them directly. Sandra called them through our insurance carrier's fleet recovery service, which is a provision in Halverson's comprehensive fleet coverage that I wrote into the vendor contract in 2023. When a fleet vehicle is in unauthorized possession and the police report has been filed, the carrier can dispatch recovery without additional waiting. The police report was filed at 11:51 a.m. CNR Recovery was dispatched at 12:03 p.m. The driver reached Birchwood Lane at 12:47 p.m. I was not there. I was in Sandra's office. But 3 people called me between noon and 1 o'clock, and I know what happened because of what they told me. The first call was from my neighbor Dina Marsh, who has lived across the street from my sister for 8 years, and who called me because she had my number from a neighborhood directory and wanted to make sure I knew. She said there were 12 people outside when the tow truck came. School pickup had just finished. 3 kids on the sidewalk. Dex was in the driveway arguing with the driver. The driver did not argue back. He read page 1 of the glovebox agreement, which Dex had left in the car, and then he called his dispatch to confirm the authorization number. And then he hooked the chain without further discussion. She said Ashton came out of the house when she heard Dex's voice. She said Ashton looked at the truck and then looked at the neighbors and then said something to Dex that Dina could not hear. She said Dex said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, that there had been a misunderstanding about the registration. She said Lily, Ashton's 8-year-old, came to the front door and looked at the truck and then looked at her mother and said, in the specific carrying voice of an 8-year-old who does not know she is being overheard, "Mom, is that Aunt Mabel's car?" She said Ashton did not answer her. Dina said the truck was gone by 1 o'clock. She said Dex stood in the empty driveway for 3 minutes after it left and then went inside without looking at any of the neighbors. The second call was from my mother. She said, "Mabel, I think there has been a misunderstanding." I said, "There has not been a misunderstanding, Mom. There has been a crime." She said, "That is a very strong word." I said, "It is the correct word under Iowa Code 714.1. She did not say anything for 6 seconds. Then she said, "I will talk to your father." I said, "Ask him about June 14th. She said, "What happened June 14th? I said, "Ask him." The third call was from Aunt Greta, my mother's older sister. She has lived in Millbrook for 63 years and has spent most of them telling members of my family what they should feel about each other. She said, "Mabel, your sister has 3 children and you have a company car. They would have gotten you a new one." I said, "Greta, the Iowa Insurance Division will be contacting Dex Parnell this week about a fraudulent filing he made in July. If you have legal advice for him, now would be a good time to find him a lawyer." She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I have to go. I know some of you have been the person in the family whose things were considered available because you were considered steady. You know what it is to have something that was yours treated like it was the family's to allocate. Comment my name on the registration below and hit subscribe, because the next part is the part about Dex's prior history. What the Iowa Insurance Division investigator found in a Hy-Vee checkout line, and what grandmother Opal left in an attorney's office 4 years ago. I want you to be here for all three. Sandra had printed the dot fraud file in full by the time the fleet director joined us at 1:15. His name is Rick Halverson, the founder's son, and he does not say many words, but the ones he says count. He picked up the dot form and looked at the signature line and set it back down and said, "Get the police report number from dispatch. We file this afternoon." Sandra already had the number. She had filed while I was in the rideshare. Rick looked at me and said, "How long has your sister's husband been operating in this space?" I said, "He sold cars for 11 years until 2020. He told my family he left voluntarily." Rick looked at Sandra. Sandra pulled up a second document she had been holding on her laptop. She said, "Iowa Motor Vehicle Enforcement records show a license suspension issued to a Dex Parnell, Waterloo, Iowa, in February 2019. The suspension was for fraudulent vehicle transfer. He processed a sale using a forged title on a 2016 Ford F-150. The buyer filed a complaint with the Iowa Department of Transportation. Parnell's dealer license was suspended for 14 months. He was also required to pay $31,000 in restitution to the buyer." The room was quiet for a moment. Rick said, "This is not new behavior." Sandra said, "No," and the Iowa Insurance Division investigator I spoke to this afternoon said that when a person with a prior fraudulent transfer suspension files a forged document with DOT, the investigation escalates from civil to criminal. She set the second document on the table beside the GP's log and the DOT fraud form. They are opening a criminal fraud file today. He will be contacted by the end of the week. I looked at the 3 documents on the table. The GPS log showing 4 unauthorized uses, the DOT form with Dex's name in the submitting party line, and my forged signature in the lessee field, the 2019 suspension record with the $31,000 figure. I said, "Sandra, can you pull whether the June 14th key copy was at a hardware store near my parents' house?" The GPs would show any stop on the route to my place from Birchwood Lane on that evening. She pulled up the GPS archive. She said, "June 14th. Lot 14 was at your registered home address. It did not move. The key copy would have been made from your personal keyring, not the vehicle." I said, "Then Ashton would have needed to take my keys off the hook when I was not watching." I thought about June 14th, my parents' anniversary dinner. Ashton had arrived early to help my mother in the kitchen. I had arrived at 6:30 with a bottle of wine. I put my keys on the back hook when I came in. At 7:15, Ashton had asked me to check on something in the back bedroom. She had asked me specifically, not Norm, not Rhonda. Me, I had been out of the kitchen for 11 minutes. When I came back, Ashton was at the counter slicing bread. My keys were on the hook where I had left them. At least that is what I thought. I wrote June 14th, 7:15 p.m., back bedroom, 11 minutes in my notes. I sent the note to Sandra. She forwarded it to the investigating officer. I want you to sit with what I am going to tell you next about my father, because it is not comfortable and I am not going to make it softer than it is. When I got home at 4 o'clock that afternoon and my mother opened the door with the dish towel in her hands, my father was at the kitchen table in the same chair he had been in at 11 a.m. He had not moved in 5 hours except to refill his coffee. I sat down across from him. I said, "Dad, tell me everything." He said, "Dex came over in May. He said you had a company car, and if something happened with the company you would lose it anyway, and Ashton's family needed something bigger. He said he had looked at the paperwork, and it was basically yours. He asked if I thought you would agree to loan it for a few months. I said I did not think so. He said he would talk to your mother. Your mother asked me if I thought it was reasonable. I said I did not think it was reasonable. She said Ashton needed it. I said okay. I said, and June 14th. He said, Ashton said she just needed to hold on to a copy in case of emergency. She said it was a precaution. He looked at the table. I took you to the back bedroom so she could have a minute with the keys. She said she would return the copy once you had agreed to lend the car. I said, Dad, I never agreed to lend the car. He said, I know. I said, did you know she was driving it before the conference? He said, I knew she had used it once. I thought it was one time. I did not know about the other trips. I said, there were 3 other trips before Monday, on top of this morning. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, I am sorry, Mabel. I said, I know. I went home. I sat in my house in the quiet that happens after a very loud day when all the noise was other people's. I made tea. I did not turn on the television. I opened my laptop and I looked at the documents Sandra had sent me, the GPS log, the DOT form, the 2019 suspension, the police report number. I had one more call to make. I had been putting it off because I needed the quiet first. I called Conrad Birch. Conrad Birch is a family attorney in Cedar Falls who has been my grandmother Opal's estate attorney since 2018. Opal died in November of 2022. She was 81 years old. She had lived in the Corey family home on Maple Street in Millbrook for 54 years. She taught Sunday school. She kept a garden. She left a specific provision in her estate instructions that Conrad had been holding since before she died, in a sealed letter with a specific trigger condition attached. Conrad picked up on the 3rd ring. He said, Mabel, I was expecting your call. I should tell you that I received a contact from the Iowa Insurance Division investigator at 2:14 this afternoon. They reached out because my name appeared in your grandmother's estate documents as holder of a property deed, and they wanted to confirm Opal Corey's ownership record on the Hawk Lake cabin before they completed their fraud assessment. He paused. When that contact came in, it met the trigger condition your grandmother specified in her instructions to me. I am required to send you the sealed letter and the 1998 deed today. I said, what was the trigger condition? He said, I will read it to you. Your grandmother wrote, if any Mabel Corey employer or any Iowa state authority contacts this office regarding family interference with Mabel Corey's property or employment rights, send the letter and the deed immediately. I said, Conrad, what is in the deed? He said the Hawk Lake cabin property on County Road F12 in Black Hawk County. Your grandmother purchased it in 1992. She recorded a deed amendment in 1998, naming you as the designated successor and sole property heir. She specifically excluded all other Corey family members from inheritance rights to that property. I said, my mother has been using that cabin for 3 summers. He said, yes, I am aware. She has also made improvements to the property. I believe the figure is approximately $4,000 in deck repairs and exterior work she completed in 2023. I said, she has been renovating a cabin she does not own. He said, correct, I will send you the letter and the deed now. There is a handwritten note from your grandmother inside the letter. She asked me to tell you, and I am quoting directly, to read it when you are alone and not before. The email arrived 47 minutes later. I will tell you what the letter said in a moment. I want to tell you first what happened to my mother when I forwarded the deed to my father's phone and asked him to read it to her at the kitchen table. Norm read it at 6:30 p.m. He read the property description. He read the 1998 date. He read Mabel Corey, sole successor, all other Corey family members expressly excluded. He read it aloud because that is how my father processes documents he cannot believe. Rhonda had the dish towel in her hands when he started reading. By the time he finished the second paragraph, she had folded it into a square and then folded it again and then folded it again until it was the smallest it could be folded. She held it that way, the smallest version of the thing Opal had made for her 40 years ago, until Norm put the phone face down on the table. She did not say anything for 4 minutes. Norm told me this later. He said she sat very still, and then she said, "She knew." He said he asked who she meant. She said, "Your mother." She knew this would happen someday, and she made sure Mabel had the paper for it. Norm said he did not have anything to say to that, except yes. Opal's handwritten note was 3 sentences long. I read it at my kitchen table at 7:43 p.m. with the lamp on and the house quiet. I am not going to read it to you here. It was written for me. What I will tell you is that she wrote the date at the top. March 9th, 2021, 14 months before she died. She wrote it the same week that Ashton told Rhonda at an Easter dinner that Mabel's company car would probably be replaced before the lease was up, and that the family ought to think about what to do with the current one. Conrad told me later that Opal had been at that Easter dinner. Opal had heard what Ashton said. Opal had called Conrad the following Monday. I sat at my kitchen table and held the note and thought about my grandmother at 80 years old calling her attorney on a Monday in March because she had heard her granddaughter's name come up in a conversation about taking things. I thought about the $4,000 in the savings account she had set aside. I thought about the deed she had updated in 1998 when I was 7 years old. When nobody in the family thought to wonder why she was updating a deed on a cabin she had owned for 6 years. I put the note back in the envelope. I put the envelope in the drawer of my desk where I keep documents I need to keep. Then I opened my laptop and I wrote an email to Conrad Birch. I told him I wanted to list the Hawk Lake cabin for sale. I asked him to start the title transfer to my name. I asked him whether my mother's $4,000 in improvements would need to be addressed. He wrote back in 11 minutes. He said the improvements were made without the property owner's knowledge or consent and did not constitute a lien or a claim. He said the cabin was mine to list at my discretion. I closed my laptop. I went to bed. What I did not know that night was that the next morning Dex Parnell was going to be at a Hy-Vee grocery store on Highway 20 buying orange juice, and his phone was going to ring, and the person on the line was going to be an Iowa Insurance Division investigator named Brian Sauter, and Dex was going to answer it on speaker because he did not recognize the number and he was in the checkout line. With both hands full. If you have ever been the person in your family who kept their name on every paper and waited for the day the paper mattered, comment my name on the registration below and hit subscribe. Because the next part is the confrontation I did not plan for, but did not need to plan for, and I want you to be here when it lands. Brian Sauter called Dex at 9:14 a.m. on Tuesday. I know this because Brian called me at 9:47 and to let me know the contact had been made. He said Dex had been in a public location when he answered. He said Dex had not handled the call well. He said that based on Dex's responses, the criminal fraud case was being upgraded from a preliminary investigation to an active criminal referral to the Iowa Attorney General's office. What Brian told me secondhand was confirmed by a woman named Cheryl Moss, who was 2 people behind Dex in the checkout line at Hy-Vee and who was a neighbor of my Aunt Greta. Cheryl called Greta that afternoon. Greta called my mother. My mother called me at 11:30 with a voice that had lost its confidence. What Cheryl told Greta was this: Dex answered a call on speaker. The caller identified himself as an investigator with the Iowa Insurance Division and said he was calling regarding a fraudulent driver change filing submitted to the Iowa DOT on July 23rd and a forged lessee signature on a Halverson Transport fleet vehicle. He said the submitting party on the DOT form was listed as Dex Parnell and he needed to schedule a formal interview. He said the case had been referred to the Iowa Attorney General's office and that Dex should be aware that a prior fraudulent vehicle transfer suspension from 2019 would be considered as part of the pattern assessment. Cheryl said, Dex said, and she confirmed this to Greta word for word, I did not forge anything. My wife's sister basically owns that car. Her name is on the registration. We just moved it temporarily. Brian Sauter's voice on the other end of the call, which Cheryl could hear because it was on speaker, said, "Mr. Parnell, the lessee name on a corporate fleet vehicle does not constitute personal ownership. The primary registration lists Halverson Transport LLC as the legal owner. The signature on the dot change of driver form has been determined to be a forgery. I will need you to come to our Cedar Falls office this week. Please do not discuss the details of this matter with family members in the interim." Cheryl said the cashier was waiting for Dex's card. Dex paid with the wrong card the first time. He paid with the right card the second time. He left without the orange juice. I want you to sit with that image for a moment. A man who has been calling himself a consultant since 2020, who told my sister that a lessee name on a corporate vehicle was the same as ownership, who submitted a forged dot form and then left his phone on speaker in a grocery store checkout line, walking out of a Hy-Vee on Highway 20 without his orange juice because an investigator said the word forgery where 12 strangers could hear it. That is the dispatch voice's favorite kind of moment. The one where the information lands in public and there is no instruction to give because the situation has already handled itself. I did not go to my sister's house that week. I did not call Ashton. I let Conrad file the title transfer paperwork. I let Sandra at Halverson finish the police report process. I let Brian Sauter's office do the work that investigators do. I went to the office on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and I managed the fleet, and I responded to vendor emails, and I ate lunch at my desk. On Thursday at 2:15, my mother called. She said, "Mabel, your sister wants to talk to you." I said, "Ashton can call me herself." Rhonda said, "She is embarrassed." I said, "She should be." Rhonda said, "Mabel, this has gone further than any of us expected." I said, "Mom, she took a company vehicle. Her husband forged my signature on a state document. He had a prior fraud conviction in 2019 for the same type of offense. This went exactly as far as the Iowa Attorney General's office says it should go." A silence. Then, "I know." That was the first time my mother had said "I know" to me in that tone in 34 years. On Friday evening, my father drove to my house. He did not call first. He knocked. I opened the door. He was holding a paper bag from the diner on Main Street. He said, "I brought the soup you used to get." I let him in. He set the bag on my kitchen counter and unpacked 2 containers of the chicken and wild rice soup that the diner has served every Friday since 1994. He found my bowls without asking where I kept them, because he has a mechanic's memory for where things are placed. He poured both containers into my pot and turned the burner on low. He stood at the stove with his back to me for the 2 minutes it took to heat. I sat at the table. I watched him stand at my stove in the specific posture of a man who does not know how to apologize for the large things and has decided to be present for the small ones. He stirred the soup once, he tasted it and set the spoon on the counter. He turned the burner off and ladled 2 bowls. We sat at my kitchen table and ate soup in the way you eat soup with someone when the only thing left to say has already been said and what remains is just sitting in the same room. The diner soup is heavy on the wild rice. It has never changed. I have been eating it at that table since I was 9 years old, first at my parents' table on Maple Street and now at my own. After a while, my father said, "She knew about the key." "Your sister. She planned it." I said, "I know." He said, "She told me you would agree once you thought about it. She said you would come around." I said, "I was never going to come around." "She knew that too." He said, "Yes, I think she did." He looked at his bowl. "That is the part I cannot sit with. That she knew you would say no, and she decided to go ahead anyway, and she asked me to help, and I said okay." I said, "Why did you say okay?" He was quiet for a long time. My father is a man who takes his time with honest answers because he has spent most of his life giving fast answers that were not honest. He said, because it was easier to believe that one small thing would not matter than it was to tell your sister no. I have been telling myself that for 34 years. That one small thing at a time, none of it matters enough to be worth the fight, and every single time the thing is small until it is not. He looked up at me. I took you to the back bedroom on June 14th so she could take your keys, and I called it one small thing while I was doing it. That is who I was on June 14th. I am trying to figure out if I can be somebody different. I said, "That is a question for you, Dad, not for me." He said, "I know." He did not say anything else. He washed both bowls when he left. He stacked them on my drying rack the way he stacks things, perfectly level, the habit of a man who spent 40 years working in spaces where level mattered. He drove home. I stood in my kitchen after he left, and I looked at the 2 bowls on the drying rack, and I thought about what it means to love someone who has been choosing the easier thing your whole life and has finally admitted it. It does not fix the thing. It does not undo June 14th. But it is the beginning of a different story, and I have learned from Opal that different stories take time to record. You do not put them in the drawer the same day they start. You wait until the language settles and the document is clear. That was the confrontation, not a dramatic scene, not everyone in a room with raised voices, just my father at my table with takeout soup and the specific quality of silence that exists between 2 people when the truth has been said and there is nothing left to argue about. But there was still Saturday. On Saturday morning, Ashton called. She called at 8:42. I was on my second cup of coffee. I let it ring 3 times. I answered on the 4th. She said, "Mabel," I said. "Ashton." She said, "I need you to tell the investigator it was a misunderstanding." I said, "It was not a misunderstanding." She said, "Mabel, Dex is looking at criminal charges. Our insurance is under review. We have 3 kids." I said, "I know you have 3 kids." She said, "Then you know that this is too much. You know you could make a call and tell them it was a family miscommunication." I said, "Ashton, your husband submitted a forged document to the Iowa Department of Transportation in July. He had a prior license suspension in 2019 for fraudulent vehicle transfer. That is not a miscommunication. That is a pattern." She said, "You are doing this on purpose. You are choosing a company over your own sister." I said, "I am not choosing anything. The GPS log chose. The dot form chose. The handwriting comparison chose. I just came home from a conference." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she uses when she is changing tactics, "What about the cabin? Conrad said you are selling it." I said, "Yes," she said, "that was a family cabin." I said, "No, it was Opal's cabin." She left it to me. She updated the deed in 1998. It was mine for 26 years before I knew it. She said she should have left it to the family. I said she knew the family. She left it to me. Ashton said, "We had a family conversation about this." The 4th time I heard that sentence, she said it the same way she had said it on my porch on Monday, as if repeating a phrase enough times made it a legal instrument. I said, "Ashton, a family conversation is not a deed. It is not a registration. It is not a lessee agreement. It is not a dot form with an authorized signature. Those are the documents that tell you what belongs to whom. A conversation in a kitchen does not appear in any county record anywhere in Iowa." She said, "You sound like a lawyer." I said, "I sound like someone who reads what she signs." She hung up. I finished my coffee. I went for a walk. Millbrook in August is warm in the morning before the heat settles. I walked past the hardware store and past the library and past the Victorian storefront on Main Street that I have been thinking about for 2 years for reasons that have nothing to do with this story. I walked for 40 minutes. I came home. On Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock I drove to my parents' house on Maple Street. I had not called ahead. I knocked on the door and Rhonda opened it with the dish towel on her shoulder and looked at me for a moment and then stepped back to let me in. The kitchen table had 4 chairs. Norm was already seated. Rhonda sat across from him. I sat at the head. I set my laptop on the table and I opened it. Ashton arrived 8 minutes later. She had not been invited. My mother had called her when I knocked. She came in through the back door, the way she has come in through the back door her entire life. She sat in the remaining chair. Dex was not with her. She set her phone face down on the table. I said, I am going to show you 4 documents. I would like each of you to look at them as I open them. I am going to name each one before I open it. Rhonda said, Mabel, I do not think this is necessary. I said, it is necessary for me. No one said anything else. I said, Document 1. The Halverson Transport Corporate Fleet Lessee Agreement for Lot 14, dated March 2022. Page 1, Section 1. I turned the laptop to face them. This vehicle is the property of Halverson Transport LLC. Unauthorized transfer of possession constitutes theft of company property under Iowa Code 7141. This document has been in the glove box of that Tahoe for 2 years and 3 months. Norm looked at it, Rhonda looked at it, Ashton looked at the table. I said, Document 2. The GP's fleet log for Lot 14, August through October. 4 unauthorized uses, July 9th, July 23rd, August 2nd, and the Monday of the conference. The July 9th and August 2nd trips logged routes to 1412 Birchwood Lane. Your address, Ashton, Ashton said. Dex said. I said, Document 3. She stopped. I said, the Iowa change of lessee form submitted on July 23rd by Dex Parnell. The outgoing lessee signature reads Mabel Corey. Our HR department's handwriting analysis, confirmed by the Iowa Insurance Division, determined that signature is a forgery. The submitting party line reads Dex Parnell. His name, his handwriting. Confirmed, Rhonda's hand went to the dish towel on her shoulder. She took it off. She folded it once. She put it on the table in front of her and kept both hands flat on top of it. I said, Document 4. The 1998 deed amendment for the Hawk Lake Cabin on County Road F12, Black Hawk County. Recorded October 14, 1998. Grantor, Opal Ruth Corey. Designated successor, Mabel Jean Corey. All other Corey family heirs expressly excluded. I turned the laptop so all 3 of them could see it at once. Opal updated this deed 26 years ago. Conrad Birch has held it since 2018. The cabin has been mine since 1998. The deck repairs and exterior work you paid for in 2023, Mom, were made on property you have not owned at any point. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Norm said, in the specific voice of a man who has spent 5 days trying to find a version of events he can live with and has finally stopped looking, I knew she was particular about that cabin. She never let anyone else hold the key. Ashton said, this is not fair. I said, Ashton, fairness is a conversation. I am showing you documents. Rhonda looked at the deed on the laptop screen for a long time. She looked at her mother-in-law's name in the grantor line. She looked at my name in the successor line. She looked at the date. October 14th, 1998. I was 7 years old that October. It was the same year Ashton got the bike. She said, very quietly, she was telling us something. I said, she was telling you something for 26 years. Nobody heard it. Ashton pushed back from the table. She picked up her phone. She said, I am not going to sit here and be lectured. She walked out the back door. It did not slam. She pulled it closed behind her the way you pull a door when you have lost the argument and you know it and you do not want to give the room the satisfaction of a sound. Norm looked at the space where she had been sitting. He said, Sandra told you, didn't she? At Halverson. She told you to bring the documents. I said, Sandra told me the documents would tell the story better than I could. He nodded once. That was Sandra's killing line. Not delivered in the room. Delivered 2 days before it, in a conference room in Cedar Falls, to a woman who had spent her whole career reading what she signed. The documents will tell the story better than you can. That is the dispatch voice version of justice. You do not raise your voice. You open the laptop. You name each document. You let the room recalculate. Rhonda sat at her kitchen table with the dish towel under her hands for a long time after I left. I know this because Norm told me. He said she sat there until dark. He said he brought her a glass of water and she held it without drinking. He said at 8 o'clock she said, out loud to no one particular, she knew I would renovate that cabin. She always knew what we were going to do before we did it. He said he did not know whether she was sad about it or whether she was something else. He said she set the glass down and she said, that girl got her grandmother's eyes. I want to say one thing before I keep going. I want to say it in the dispatch voice, which is the only voice I know how to use when the information is this large. I did not do this to hurt my mother. I did not do this to punish my sister. I did this because a company vehicle was taken without authorization, and a state document was forged, and a criminal history was allowed to repeat itself, and someone had to say so in the language that means something in Iowa, which is the language of documents and signatures and recorded deeds. Opal said it in that language in 1998. I said it in that language on a Saturday in August. We used the same vocabulary. We were always going to say it the same way. The next part is what you came for. Hit subscribe because the months after August in Millbrook are the part of this story that matters most, and I want you here when I tell it. Here is what happened after. The Iowa Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against Dex Parnell on October 3rd. 3 counts. First was felony theft under Iowa Code 7441 for unauthorized possession of property valued above $10,000. Second was forgery under Iowa Code 745A.2 for the forged lessee signature. Third was fraudulent practice under Iowa Code 744.8, elevated to a serious misdemeanor in light of the 2019 prior suspension. Dex hired an attorney in Iowa City. He pleaded guilty in December to a reduced charge of fraudulent practice and unauthorized vehicle use. He received a 2-year suspended sentence, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay Halverson Transport $840 in towing and processing fees. His Iowa consulting license, which had been issued under a different business category than vehicle sales, was flagged for a secondary compliance review. Ashton received a civil citation for unauthorized use of a vehicle under Iowa Code 321.76, not a criminal charge. A civil citation that went on a record and required a $500 fine. She paid it in November. She has not spoken to me since the Saturday phone call in August. Halverson Transport issued me a notice of commendation for my handling of the incident and updated the corporate fleet lessee agreement to include a mandatory glovebox checklist that lessee must complete and return signed at the start of each vehicle assignment. Sandra sent it to me with a note that said, "You wrote page 9. This update is because of you." I keep the note in my desk drawer next to Opal's envelope. Rhonda's deck repairs and exterior work on the Hawk Lake cabin became a point of negotiation in Conrad's title transfer process. Conrad determined that the improvements, made without the property owner's knowledge, did not create a financial claim on the property. However, I instructed Conrad to send my mother a check for $4,000 from the proceeds of the cabin sale, not because she was owed it, because the dish towel on her shoulder was crocheted by a woman who would have wanted her to have it back. The Hawk Lake cabin sold in February for $187,000. I used $112,000 of the proceeds as a down payment on a house in Millbrook. It is 3 blocks from the Main Street storefront I have been thinking about. It has a back porch that faces east. My partner Ben helped me move in on a Saturday in March. He did not say much about the house. He set up the bookshelves while I unpacked boxes. He made dinner. Norm has come to the house twice since March. He brings the soup from the diner both times. He washes the bowls when he leaves. Rhonda has not come. I do not expect her soon. I expect her eventually. Aunt Greta called once in September to tell me that what I had done to Ashton's family was not how the Coreys handled things. I said, Greta, Dex handled it first. I just handled it second. She said, that is not what family means. I said, I know what family means, Greta. My grandmother spent 40 years showing me. She has not called since September. Lily, Ashton's 8-year-old, sent me a card at Christmas. She drew a picture of a car on the front with a person waving from the window. On the inside, she wrote, in the handwriting of a child who is still learning how letters curve, I am sorry about your car, Aunt Mabel. Mom says it was complicated. I think it was your car. I read it 3 times. I put it in the desk drawer with Opal's envelope and Sandra's note and the Conrad Birch title confirmation. I want to say one thing before I go. My grandmother Opal updated a deed in 1998 when I was 7 years old. She did not tell me. She did not tell my mother or my father or my sister. She went to Conrad Birch's office, and she sat down, and she said she wanted the Hawk Lake cabin to go to Mabel when she was gone, and she wanted a specific condition on the trigger so the letter would arrive at exactly the moment it was most needed. She was 63 years old when she did that. She had 32 more years to change her mind, and she did not change it once. I have thought about why she was so specific. She could have just left me the cabin in a simple will. But she wanted the letter to arrive the day the family tried to take something else. She wanted it to land on a Tuesday in August when my driveway was empty and my sister was on my porch and my father had said okay. She wanted me to have not just the property, but the proof that someone had seen exactly how this family worked and had prepared for it 26 years in advance. That is what Opal knew. She knew that the family would have a conversation. She knew that the conversation would not include my name until the property was being discussed. She knew that a conversation without a deed is just noise. A conversation is not a registration. A conversation is not a deed. A conversation is not a lessee agreement. The paper is the paper, and the paper says what the paper says, and the paper had my name on it since 1998. If you have ever had someone call a thing theirs because they talked about it in a kitchen, comment my name on the registration below. Share this with the one person in your life who knows the difference between a claim and a document. Subscribe to Calm Life Stories. The back porch faces east. On clear mornings, I can see the light come up over the field behind the house before anyone on Main Street is moving. I make coffee. I sit with it. The deed is in the drawer. That is the whole answer.